Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. It is time to talk about all that has happened on an incredibly crazy college football Saturday. Jesse Simonton, it's almost all chalk. Other than Louisville, Kentucky, it's chalk, but the most dramatic kind of chalk I've ever seen in my life. We've got Florida State escaping Gainesville with its college football playoff hopes intact. We've got Alabama with its own prayer at Jordan-Hare. We've got Michigan and Ohio State playing a classic. We've got Oklahoma State needing 2 overtimes to beat BYU. Georgia's sleepy, clean old-fashioned sleep, but they did beat Georgia Tech.
This was the Homer Simpson gif where he's like, writing on the chalkboard, I will not ever doubt that even the most chalk of college football weekends can deliver the most epic of games, because it was just drama. I mean, the prayer at Jordan-Hare was insane. The Ollie Gordon show, for them to look like they were going to allow Oklahoma to sneak in and make the Big 12 championship game, only for the Pokes to, punch their ticket, keep their bitter rival out. I mean, it was just an insanely bananas day of college football, Andy. Insane. And now we got potential coaching hires. It's just, news is firing.
Oh, yeah. Let us start in Gainesville, though, because that's the one everybody was watching tonight. It was very touch and go for the Seminoles for a while. Florida controlled most of the first half. And then I think when Florida State scored there right at the end of the half, that's when it looked like, okay, maybe they're starting to figure this out. Maybe Mike Norvell's figuring out how to call plays for Tate Rodemaker. But I thought we were going to be talking about when Florida took the lead again, 15-14, I thought we were going to be talking about the ACC being out of the playoff picture completely.
It was a 1-2, though. It was a 1-2 because not only did Florida State score, and I think they at least got something, but then Florida missed the field goal. And it did feel like that was a major missed opportunity. The Gators did end up getting the lead. But the difference in the game, Andy, was that, these studs that they have on the defensive line, Jared Verse had 2 sacks. Peyton had a couple sacks. I mean, they just hounded Max Brown up front, who clearly looked like a freshman. And then they said, Mike Norvell basically smartly decided, even before Tate Rodemaker got knocked out of the game, let's give the ball to our best player. And our best player tonight was Trey Benson. And so they rode that ground game. And and Andy, what did they do? They also just let Florida do what Florida does, which is be stupid. Florida commits a billion unforced errors, lack of discipline.
A guy got thrown out of the game for spitting on another person.
And he was the first of multiple players that got, tossed.
Targeting on a slide to give Florida State a first down and keep them going.
On a 3rd and long.
Yeah. So Tyler Wright in the chat says FSU better be back in the top 4. They're not going to be back in the top 4. Washington still has a better resume. Now, they can hope that Washington gets knocked out by Oregon. Washington barely beat Washington State, but barely beating Florida and barely beating Washington State are kind of the same thing.
One was at home and one was in the swamp. And the swamp was pretty lively tonight. But this was, back to this game, Florida State's not going to jump in the top 4. But the committee does have quite the dilemma on their hands, Andy, because the Seminoles deserve to get in if they do beat Louisville and go undefeated, if there is that spot. The question is, if they're onto their 3rd string quarterback, what sort of team are you just throwing to the wolves there?
Let me correct myself. Tyler is correct. Florida State will be in the top 4 because Washington's going to move to 3 because Ohio State's going to drop. So Ohio State will be behind Florida State.
Right. And so they're in now. They're in for now, and it's the question of, can they beat Louisville to maintain that spot? Yes,
Right.
we both had
And
the middle fart there. We had the middle fart, Andy, because Oregon and Texas look so much more impressive.
right. Then Florida State and Washington.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Well,
Alabama.
well, all right. Let's talk about Alabama right now because this was incredible. When that snap sailed past Jalen Milroe, that's it. It's over. These guys are done. 4th and goal from the 34. 4th and goal from the 34. How did this happen?
And to set the scene for the 3 folks who did not somehow see this live or on replay, Hugh Freeze and the Auburn staff's inexplicable decision to rush 2, give Jalen Milroe like as if he was playing 500. He had all the time he wanted to.
If you're
and then
rushing
somehow,
2,
Andy,
right? If you're rushing 2,
Isaiah
they
Bond was
somehow end up with
one-on-one.
single coverage in the back of the end zone.
Yes, one-on-one in the back of the corner of the end zone. It was just inexplicable. The game management at the end I think Auburn fans, if you gave them the truth serum after this, how painful that was, they'd have rather lost by 28. Coming off the heels of getting blasted by New Mexico State to then lose like that to Alabama when you could have spoiled their, potential 11-1 season, that is just galactic meltdown stuff. Because they muffed the punt too. That's how they
right.
The muff punt set up.
Right, got Alabama back in the game, and it was not their regular punt return. It just all of it was so strange. And look, Alabama playing like that is so strange. And I was about to say it and take the bait and say, well, this means Alabama can't beat Georgia. But New Mexico State didn't mean that Auburn couldn't beat Alabama, because Auburn should have beaten Alabama. So Alabama messing around in the Iron Bowl doesn't mean that Alabama can't go beat Georgia next week, because look, we saw a sleepy Georgia against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia looked completely disinterested tonight in Atlanta. They sat out a ton of guys, and that they kind of played like that. They kind of played like they were already looking ahead. I will say this for Alabama. They dominated the stat sheet. They dominated the box score. They were awesome. They were good on 3rd down. They had more total yards, 1st downs. They had multiple touchdowns taken off the scoreboard. But we just lamented Florida's, lack of discipline and self-inflicted mistakes. That's what gave Auburn the chance to win this game. Alabama was extremely sloppy. They committed umpteen penalties in the first half. And so that's how you get these touchdowns negated. Right after that snap that you spoke about, that sails past, and that's an 18-yard loss. Then Milroe gets another forward penalty for crossing the line of scrimmage for an illegal forward pass. Move them back even more. So if they commit those sorts of mistakes, Alabama's not going to beat Georgia. They have to absolutely clean up some of that stuff. Nick Saban was right. After the game, he was great. He said he's been in these shoes before when they haven't been quite so fortunate, and fortune was on their side tonight.
Yeah, and that's really all you can say is fortune, because it was not. This should not have been that close. This should have been, Alabama by 3 touchdowns in this game based on these two teams the last couple of months. But you just don't know. You just don't know from week to week. And we saw it over and over again on Saturday. It started with Kentucky beating Louisville, but then it was the Iron Bowl. It was the Apple Cup. It was BYU taking a lead on Oklahoma State coming back, BYU forcing overtime, and then Oklahoma State winning in double overtime. Like, nobody was safe at all. Nobody was safe.
Except for Michigan.
But the thing is, like, Michigan and Ohio State are both good. They
Right.
both
played. Yes.
Yeah, they both played a good game, and Michigan won the good game. That's really what happened there. It wasn't that they were that far apart. They were 6 points apart, and Ohio State was moving down the field at the end of the game, and then Michigan got pressure. Kyle McCord throws a pick, game over. I thought this was a really interesting game, though. And I just finished a column. I don't think it's up quite yet on 3, but about where Ryan Day is right now in this rivalry, because I remember being there 4 years ago when Ohio State had just torched Michigan. Justin Fields had thrown for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins had run for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. Michigan hadn't ever felt close at all. And I remember somebody asking Harbaugh, is it a talent gap? Is it a coaching gap? And as soon as the word coaching gap came out, Harbaugh like whips his head around. Looked like he'd have shot laser beams through the person if he could have shot laser beams with his eyes. And although Harbaugh handled that situation differently, it felt the same where he had no answers to give. Ryan Day felt the same way today. There were no answers Ryan Day could give to say, here's what I can do better. Like even though they're close, like this was a close game. A few plays would have turned it. It doesn't feel that close when you're asking Ryan Day, what do you do about this? You've lost 3 in a row in this rivalry.
No, you put a blindfold on Andy, and his blind resume screams top 5 coach in the country. But then he's facing an existential crisis right now, or that program is, because they've lost 3 straight to the team up north, and you're not supposed to lose to Michigan at all, much less 3 in a row. I go back to the comments that Harbaugh made a year later that Ryan Day has still never been able to come back from now that he is lost to an interim head coach, which is the born on third base stuff. Yep. I mean, that is going to be, fair or not, that is going to be, on his tombstone at this point, because he can't beat Michigan. And again, I don't bet it's fair or not. That's where he is right now, and that's how a lot of Buckeyes fans view him, and that's why those John Cooper comparisons are only growing louder and louder.
Now, John Cooper was 2-10-1, but that was a very different climate. Coaches were not held to the same standards they are right now, and I don't think they're going to fire Ryan Day. I mean, Ryan Day has 3 Big Ten losses, and they're all to Michigan. Like, that is insane when you think about it. But they are so unhappy, and I have no problem saying he was out-coached by Sharon Moore on Saturday. Sharon Moore told his players before the game, I am going to be the most aggressive play caller you've ever seen in your life. He went for it on 4th down 3 times in the first half, once on 4th and goal from the 1. That was their first touchdown. Twice on their second touchdown drive, and they converted them both. And then you have Ryan Day at the end of the half. They have 40 seconds left. They have 4th and 2 from the 34-yard line.
Turtle
runs the clock and sends out his kicker to miss a 52-yard field goal attempt. Like, that's the game right there.
Also turned down a chance to go for it on 4th and 1 from midfield. What does Sharon Moore also do? Dials up a halfback pass for a 35-yard explosive play, brings in the backup quarterback for a surprise 20-yard run. I mean, he kept his foot on the gas, Andy. And again, Ohio State just, in the end, they did not have, they turtled at the end. They did not have the mettle. They were not battle tested. And so I think it's a double deal too, Andy, because Michigan had the better quarterback, who's a guy who Ohio State could have gotten in the recruiting cycle.
JJ mentioned that after the game.
You circle back to that JJ McCarthy could have been a Buckeye, grew up a Buckeyes fan. And then to fast forward to the present and have the guy you picked throw 2 just backbreaking interceptions, one that sets up Michigan's first touchdown, and after the 2 teams had kind of traded punts. I wrote a column after the game, talking about this heavyweight bout and how the beginning, they were just kind of feeling each other out. And then they started swinging, and then they each started throwing haymakers. Michigan had more punches, and it's because they had the better guy behind center and the bullying offensive line, and Blake Corum at running back.
Yeah. Michigan still had the best player. Or I'm sorry, Ohio State still had the best player. Like, Marvin Harrison Jr. was still the best player on the field. But it felt like after that, Michigan had the better quarterback, better offensive line, better interior defensive line, better running backs. And Travion Henderson had been good. Mikey Sainristil blasted him twice, and then it didn't seem the same after that. And I will say the way Michigan handled Zach Zinner's injury was really impressive too, because that was one of those things that could really, you're losing one of your best players. That's their right guard who had the horrific, gruesome injury where they had to cart him off the field. The next play, they shuffle the offensive line. Blake Corum scores over the left side.
Jump cut in the hole, 22 yards.
To break the tie. And then they didn't really have problems protecting McCarthy the rest of the game, even though you worried they would because of the changes they had to make. And it's interesting because that was part of the thing when Ohio State was dominating it, especially the Meyer years. Ohio State was much more talented than Michigan. They are not much more talented than Michigan anymore, even though their recruiting rankings are still higher. Like, you go to the NFL draft, I remember I did a column off that 2019 game. And in the previous 5 drafts, Ohio State had 40 guys picked, and Michigan had only had 24. In the 4 drafts since, Michigan's had 32 guys picked and Ohio State's had 31. So they've closed the gap. Now, Ohio State's guys still get drafted higher, but it's turning on that front too. And like, Michigan's going to have double-digit guys drafted this year. Their output has gotten much, much better.
Yeah, 100%. I rubber stamp that stat as the closing of the gap as kind of an indicator of how this series has flipped on its head. I think it's also because of exactly Michigan's response after seeing their All-American guard go down. They are the emotionally mature team. They are the resilient team. And for them to literally say, we got this for our dude, one play, touchdown, and then, Andy, they stopped Ohio State right after that.
Yeah.
That in a flash, they flipped the game, and while it wasn't quote unquote over, they took control and had Ohio State's, back to the whole boxing metaphor. They had Ohio State on the ropes, and they just kind of kept them there and just jabbed until the end of the game. I mean, they chewed up the last 7 minutes effectively of the fourth quarter to just completely milk the clock.
We got some Knowles mad at us in the chat, Jesse. They're mad that we're giving, they think we're giving the Knowles short shrift. But Maximus says, not going to lie, I was a little worried about the Knowles after the first quarter. I was not worried about Florida State once they scored that touchdown at the end of the first half. After the first quarter, I was still a little worried about them. But I thought they were going to beat Florida once they made it 12-7. I thought they kind of had it figured out. I'm not particularly worried about Florida State against Louisville, though they could lose to Louisville. Who knows? Louisville lost to Kentucky. But and everybody in the chat keeps comparing Florida State to Ohio State. Guys, Ohio State and Florida State aren't being compared. Don't worry about them. Worry about Florida State in comparison to Texas. That's the one you got to worry about. Florida State in comparison to Oregon. That's the one you got to worry about. Because nobody's knocking, like, Ohio State is not knocking Florida State out. If Florida State is 13-0, they're in the playoff. Ohio State will not be a consideration.
Ohio State needed all this chaos that almost happened today to happen for them to even back in. They're not making the playoff, not winning the Big Ten like they did in 2022. That's not happening in back-to-back years.
Let's talk scenarios now, because I think it all sets up pretty easily at this point, as long as one thing happens. And that one thing is Georgia beating Alabama in the SEC championship game, because Alabama beating Georgia would complicate things quite a bit. But if Georgia beats Alabama, Georgia's your number 1 seed. Michigan will beat Iowa. They'll be your number 2 seed. Washington, if they win against Oregon, will be your number 3 seed. If Oregon wins, then we'll talk. Now we have something to talk about. But I do think of the 12-1 teams, well, this is where it gets weird. In this scenario where Georgia beats Alabama, if Florida State wins out, Florida State is going to be in. they're going to be 3 or 4, right? I'm not crazy, right?
You're not crazy. And so then what you're leading us down the water to here, if I'm the horse, you're taking me to the well here.
Right.
Is
But what about Oregon and Texas? That's
going to be the committee's dilemma, is which team do they feel like is the better one-loss team? Thus far, they have rubber stamped Oregon as that team. The Ducks continue to look impressive. We talked about it last night. What they did to Oregon State was another signature win to kind of cruise past the Beavers there. Meanwhile, Washington's just kind of getting by, so I think it only gives us further credence of why you and I both believe that the Ducks will win in Las Vegas on Friday. But we'll see. They obviously have to if they want to get into the playoff. I do think in this scenario, Andy, and this may make Florida State fans mad, you'll get in, but you won't be the 3 seed.
You be the 4.
They're gonna put a one-loss team at 3 ahead of Florida State because of where this Florida State is roster-wise at quarterback right now. And Seminole fans aren't going to like that, but that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and fair or not, that's what it is. I'm with Maximus in the chat. This would be a great season for the 12-team playoff. That would be a lot of fun. The argument we'd be having, I think, Jesse, for the 12-team playoff right now would be that last at-large spot between like Oklahoma, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Penn State. Like 3 of those would get spots and 1 of those wouldn't. So who would be left out?
Louis, the irony is in the 12-team playoff. I don't want to lead us down a
bad. So all of them would get in because Louisville would be out after losing Kentucky, unless they beat.
Well, no, they wouldn't unless they beat Florida State, in which they would both get in, and Louisville would have that loss would have meant nothing, and they still could have gotten a bye week. So, but
all right, Zach brought this up in the chat. We need to discuss this. If Alabama beats UGA, they'll make it no matter how much it upsets people, is what Zach says. All right, here's what complicates that. If Alabama beats Georgia, Texas will be 12-1 if they beat Oklahoma State with head-to-head win in Tuscaloosa. Will Texas be ranked ahead of Alabama? And then will Alabama and Georgia both get in? Because that's 3 spots, and Michigan's going to get the other one if that's the case.
The results got to matter, Andy. I think even if before this weekend, I believe that Alabama was the better team over Texas. I'm not sure we can say that tonight based on how the Iron Bowl went. And
we certainly can't say that this weekend based on what we've seen. Yeah.
Based on what we've seen. And so I think the committee is going to would be able to lean on the most recent results. But it will be hard for the committee to leave out the SEC champ who just, if it happens, snaps a team's 30-game losing streak or 30-game winning streak to the 2-time defending champs. So that is going to be quite the debate. But we're not there yet. We got to get there.
No Boy Rex says, so both of you are fortune tellers. How wouldn't we be number 3 if we were 13-0 at a 12-1 team? Will, only because of our QB? Make it make sense. Yes, partly because of your QB, partly because you're not going to be viewed as being as good as that team. They will say if you played, you would lose. That's what they'll think.
You should be thankful that you're getting in.
Yes,
at all. Like that's the whole thing, is that you're still your team is still being, Florida State would still be being rewarded for an undefeated season, but the committee would also admit that
having to play Georgia is not much of a reward. That's the problem.
Well, true, but they would,
Maximus says that Noles get held to a different standard. They're not being held to a different standard. They're being held to the same standard as everybody else. And people think if they played Oregon, they'd lose. But unfortunately, there's not a 12-team playoff to actually let us see the freaking game. That would be better. It's not fair to anybody, to Florida State or to Oregon or to Texas or whoever we're talking about here, that it's going to be some judgment call. That's stupid. They need to be able to play it out.
Well, the other thing is that, to that, I didn't see that questioner's name, but, getting judged unfairly. The irony is, Andy, Florida State's resume is worse than these one-loss teams behind them. But I think and the results have to matter.
They can't. The Florida State fans here in the chat cannot get over the Ohio State thing. But Ohio State losing their QB and making it is a different story. No, Ohio State's not making it. Guys, let it go. Ohio State isn't making it.
Are they referring to 2014? Are they referring to the
the 2014
when Ohio
game?
State? Yeah.
You mean when Ohio State put Cardell Jones in and beat Wisconsin 59-0 in the Big Ten championship? Okay, I'll give you this. If Tate Rodemaker beats Louisville 59-0, you got no problems. You don't need to worry about anything. You think that's going to happen?
You'll be the 3 seed. You'll be the 3 seed.
Yeah. So if you win 59-0 against Louisville, there's nothing to worry about. Do you think you're going to win 59-0 against Louisville? Not based on what we saw tonight, because Florida's defense isn't very good.
I'll say this, Andy. Based on what I saw tonight, I feel even better. Like I kind of teased it earlier, but I feel even better about our pick of Oregon. Washington's offense is just not right. And Kalen DeBoer dialed up an awesome play on that 4th down when he dialed up basically the reverse option.
Mm-hmm.
Penix flips it backwards to Rome Odunze, who becomes his lead blocker, and it like a 25 or ish so run that set up the would-be game-winning field goal. But Penix was off pretty much all afternoon. They got basically one of their touchdowns was a complete freebie because Washington State's defender literally just fell down at the line of scrimmage, and Odunze was able to run 50 yards wide open down the field for a score. I just, they continue to kind of get by the skin of their teeth. They're kind of this year's March Madness survive in advance team. But I think now that they're running up against the Ducks group that just seems to be humming and humming on both sides of the ball. I can't wait for the game on Friday. We talked about a little bit about it last night, but now that we've seen another data point, the last one from Washington, good for them. First undefeated season since 1991. We'll see if it lasts more than a week.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Washington wins, they're in. I think Florida State wins, they're in. Unless Alabama beats Georgia, then it gets all complicated. And based on what we saw tonight, I don't think Alabama's going to beat Georgia. Now, maybe we get their version where they are the Auburn in the Iron Bowl today. But it will be, that game's going to be intense because talent-wise, Alabama, let me ask you this, Jesse. Of the teams Georgia has left to play, Alabama in the SEC championship game, and then potentially 2 opponents in the college football playoff, does Alabama have a better chance than anybody else to beat them?
Man, that's a great question. I would say, man for man, you're probably right. Obviously Alabama is the most talented team per, the blue chip ratio and all the 4 and 5 stars that they have accumulated on that roster. I think that's probably the scariest team for Georgia.
Yeah.
Outside of maybe Oregon, that's probably the scariest team for Georgia to play. Because Michigan is trying to be a version of Georgia, just with less, as good as they are, as much NFL talent as they have, they're trying to be a better version of Georgia with lesser athletes. And so I think that this is, it's kind of crazy. Kirby Smart has more national titles than wins over Nick Saban. So this is his chance to tie that 2-2. Again, Georgia sleptwalked their way past Tech tonight. They clearly they were not overly interested. It didn't seem to be in that game. I can't wait. Next weekend, I don't know who knows what we're going to get from Oklahoma State, Andy.
Exactly.
They didn't show up in the first half against a bad BYU team, only for Ollie Gordon to run crazy wild in the second half. He scored 5 touchdowns. All of them came after halftime or in overtime. But then the Pokes still tried to give it away. Ollie Gordon scores the game-winning score inside the final. I think it was like 45 seconds, and then
BYU kicks a field goal. Yeah.
Well, they get the extra point block, so it's not a 4-point win or not a 4-point lead. BYU goes down, kicks the field goal. Crazy. But it was their, I think, 3rd largest comeback in school history. Gundy was feeling himself afterwards. That's for sure.
Before we leave the Big 12, I do want to point out Iowa State won a snowy Farmageddon. It looked incredible on that. I mean, just piles of snow in that Kansas State Iowa State game, and Matt Campbell and company emerged the victors. I will say this about the Big 12 championship game: if we see the version of Texas we saw on Friday against Texas Tech, Texas is winning the Big 12 championship. But we've not seen that version of Texas every single week, and that is sort of the thing we keep saying is, are they going to consistently perform like that? Because I will say this, Jesse. You know, that question I asked you about, is Alabama the team best equipped to beat Georgia that could potentially play Georgia in the next 3 games? I actually think player for player, Texas might be that team if they are firing on all cylinders. But there's a version of Texas that Georgia just boat races. So it depends on which one shows up.
Yeah, and Texas's bugaboo about not scoring touchdowns in the red zone would loom large in a game where you need as many points as possible. Because that's the other thing, Andy. You know what we're about to enter now that we've officially crossed the equator of regular season into big boy football, where it gets hot and spicy. We're playing in domes, and Kirby Smart has shown what his team can do when you get on these fast tracks, and suddenly 40 points turns into 50 burgers real quickly. And so can they do that against Alabama? I don't know, but they have shown that an absolute ability to do that in these college football playoff games, so not only do you have to play, against a Georgia defense, which is not as good as it was a year ago, 2 years ago for certain, this is an offense that is capable of lighting up the scoreboard fast.
Well, we think we got the playoff. We don't know what's going to happen, but we think we have a handle on the playoff scenarios. Jesse, let's talk coaching carousel. We know one thing. Jonathan Smith has been hired by Michigan State. We got that down. He goes from Oregon State.
Thumbs up to that one.
Yeah, it's going to be – I think that's a good hire. I think he did a great job at Oregon State. You knew when conference realignment happened that Jonathan Smith was going to get plucked by somebody because Oregon State remains in conference limbo. And even though it's his alma mater, there were a lot of teams that were going to be really interested. So he goes to Michigan State. That's a done deal. As we record this at 11:52 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday, the rumors are out there about Mark Stoops being the candidate at Texas A&M. Started hearing his name Wednesday night, Thursday morning. It got louder and louder as we got to Saturday. You saw Mark Stoops beat Louisville. So if that's his last game at Kentucky, it's a pretty good last game. Aggie Twitter is ablaze right now, Jesse. You almost wonder if they leak this thing to see what the reaction would be, and then to avoid another Schiano situation.
That's what I asked you before. I mean, I wondered that. I was texting with someone before we hopped on if that was the case, just because TexAgs.com, Billy Lucci's, hopefully he's got a bunch of employees manning the message board tonight, because TexAgs is on fire, as you said. It's an interesting hire, Andy, because obviously we both think highly of Mark Stoops. He's a competent coach. He's a solid coach. He's done more with less at Kentucky, but I do think there is an absolute lack of ceiling there, which makes this an interesting decision by Texas A&M. You fired Jimbo Fisher for $75 million, and you basically just hired a more competent version of him. Is that really going to take you?
We don't know if they've hired him yet. Like Billy Lucci's not reporting that yet.
True.
You have not
rumored
seen that from the usual suspects. We've gotten the top target tweets from some very good reporters, but target and hired, not quite there yet. But I will say this about Stoops, and this is the question you have to ask with Stoops, and I don't honestly know the answer to this question. Was Stoops at Kentucky's ceiling or his own ceiling? If he was at Kentucky's
that is
ceiling,
the question.
If it was only at Kentucky's ceiling, but he can do more, then he can do more at Texas A&M. I do not doubt that if Mark Stoops gets the Texas A&M job, that he will recruit very well there. He recruited well above where Kentucky should be able to recruit. He will get great players at Texas A&M if he gets that job. The question will be, can he compete than with Nick Saban, with Kirby Smart, with Steve Sarkisian, with Brent Venables on the field. And that will be the big question in the new look SEC. And I don't know the answer to that. I will say, if you didn't like being strapped over a barrel by Jimbo Fisher, given what Mark Stoops makes at Kentucky and the security of his contract at Kentucky, he's going to command something similar at A&M. Like, you're going to have to give him a raise and more security, which is going to put him kind of close to Jimbo territory.
He was making what, $8 million with the Wildcats? I mean, he did. It was just 2 months ago when they lost by like 40 points to Georgia that he lamented the lack of NIL.
Right.
That's not going to be a problem at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
And he
but
has
they lost to
recruited
South
players.
Carolina last week.
Yeah, and I know. And as you said, he has recruited well at Kentucky. If he brings, it's interesting because he's done a lot of great work in the Ohio area. That's obviously probably not going to be a place that he really hammers when he's at Texas A&M. If he's at Texas A&M, we should say again, this is not official. This is not done. He is just the rumored top target. The question for me, Andy, if this is how it ultimately plays out, is he the ceiling or was Kentucky the ceiling? I think that is the 30,000-foot view.
Yeah.
If you want to get granular on it, was he holding the offense back at Kentucky because his offenses have not been very good, and that obviously is the glaring issue with what Jimbo Fisher was dealing with the last few years at Texas A&M, which does scream some red siren concerns.
Well, now Stoops is a defensive guy. He's a former defensive coordinator. So, like, it really would be hire dependent, and you assume he'd bring Liam Cohen, or maybe, I don't know, he could afford anybody he wanted if he got the A&M job. If he leaves, Troy coach John Sumrall would probably be the choice at Kentucky. That seems like a
former DC.
Yeah, former DC at Kentucky, former Wildcat. That makes the most sense if that happens. The other one that's floating around on Saturday night, and this is a name that's been floating around for the last couple days, is Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. Jeff Lebby is Oklahoma's offensive coordinator, former Ole Miss offensive coordinator. And you saw Ross Dellinger tweet that he was the top target of Mississippi State. This one, I don't know about this one. The Oklahoma was ready to run him off. Oklahoma fans were ready to run him off like 3 weeks ago. Now, I realize he was Ole Miss's offensive coordinator, and so now you would run the same offense as Ole Miss. I'm not sure that's a good reason.
I was literally just going to say, though, Andy, who's happier? Oklahoma fans who wanted Lebby out of there, or Ole Miss fans who were tired of Lebby when he was in Oxford?
I don't know. I think Oklahoma fans are pretty happy with Lebby right now. I think they're pretty happy with him after Friday.
So, I think Ole Miss fans would be pretty happy with their biggest rival hiring Jeff Lebby too. I don't get this one at all. Not when there was other Power 5 guys like a Chadwell, who obviously he came out and said, I like where I'm at with Liberty. First undefeated season in their school history today.
Yep. And Jamie Chadwell Jamie Chadwell not in the mix at Mississippi State. It doesn't seem like. Now with Jamie Chadwell, I kind of wonder: do you hang out and wait for South Carolina to potentially open in a year? Do you hang out? Like, what about North Carolina? I know Max said he's back, but man, North Carolina has not been good.
No, you talk about a dispiriting finish. USC wasted Caleb Williams. They seem to certainly waste Drake May, because that was a bad way to go out. I mean, they just got housed tonight by NC State.
NC State. Yeah, it was terrible. 39-20. The Wolfpack go 9-3. So Dave Doran, and shockingly, we've not heard Dave Doran's name this entire coaching carousel. And he's nine. This is the time he should be jumping.
He just doesn't seem to have a landing spot. No natural openings. I think Jamie Chadwell would be great at a South Carolina or a North Carolina. And, Tennessee is his dream job. That's not a secret. He wanted to get into the mix when they hired Heupel, and it was just deemed he wasn't ready, or, the powers that be deemed he and his staff, which had zero Power 5 experience, wasn't ready. Perhaps a year or two at Louisville, and they continue, win a couple Conference USA championships, they'll be in line for a bigger job. There's gonna be more dominoes to come, Andy, because if whether it's Sumrall or somebody else at Kentucky, obviously Oregon State has a bunch of Pac-12 options where they could go Ryan Grubb, or they could go for a sitting head coach. I think they have some interesting candidates there. That's going to be a tough job now that it's not quote unquote Power 5. But
do you bring Bronco Mendenhall back?
You mentioned that last
as
night.
A head coach? I think that would be interesting. We talked Florida State beating Florida. Let's talk about Florida.
Man,
I have been told over and over again that Billy Napier's safe, but everybody keeps asking me. So I'm going to ask you, well, what do you think is going to happen?
I think Billy Napier's biggest safety net is that it's not only the $32 million, Andy, it's the fact that the powers that be at Florida are not going to allow Scott Strickland to hire a third football coach.
But you can do that if you want. You can do the double if you want to. I'm blanking on the last one, but I do know Ole Miss did it in 2011 with Pete Boone and Houston Nutt. It's been done before. It just makes
that 32 million plus that. It's just a 1-2, thing that I just think it's going to be too much for the folks at Florida to overcome. I'm not saying it wouldn't be justified. The results just haven't been there. Again, this is a lack of discipline has been the hallmark of this team, this program, this entire season. Yes, they do have a top 5 recruiting class, but that's teetering a little bit, Andy. They saw several decommitments, and can you hold on to that? This was the youngest team in the SEC in terms of the guys on their 2 deep who were getting snaps. And now you've squandered back-to-back chances. Yes, they were against top 10 teams, but back-to-back chances to secure that 6th win where you needed those 15 practices. And so the other reason, Andy, I think you don't fire him is because look at the 2024 schedule. Do you want to put a first-year coach with a team that's still going to be in transition? Do you want to hand them, 7-8 losses? Because I think the writing's on the wall one way or another. I do not foresee a turnaround because of what they have next year.
Here's the problem. Let me give you this scenario. Probably he's got to hire an offensive coordinator to replace himself as the play caller. Maybe he's got to hire a defensive coordinator. We'll see if they decide to make a change there.
Special teams.
He definitely needs to hire a special teams coordinator. Now, all of these people are not going to just jump at the job. People that would be qualified that you would want. They're not going to jump at the job because they're looking at it like I'm coming into an either lame duck or complete hot seat situation. So you got to pay them more and you got to give them longer term contract. You got to give them like 3-year deals. So you're going to save $6 million firing next year versus firing now. But how much more are you going to spend if you have to do this with the coordinators? Like
it's a great. We saw this with Muschamp.
We did.
They had to give Kurt Roper a 2-year deal as offensive coordinator. They had to bring in a couple other assistant staffers and give them multi-year contracts. We've seen it. Andy, you and I have been around this. We've done this dance before around the floor. I was on the beat. You were obviously at SI national guy back then, but we've seen this dance before here in Gainesville.
We certainly have.
And it's a tough question, and I don't think that it may be easier for us to say they won't do it because of X, Y, and Z. But we're naming a lot of reasons of why they could.
Well, I think the main reason you don't do it is at a certain point you can't just fire somebody every 2-3 years. Like you can't keep doing that. You gotta let somebody have some time. And the guy who beat Billy Napier in Gainesville tonight is a great example of that. Mike Norvell had a bad first season. Obviously, took over a really tough situation after they fired Willie Taggart, and it was the pandemic. But he started that 2021 season 0-4. And I think there was probably a point where Florida State had the money. They might have considered doing something to him in year 2. And boy, are they glad they didn't now. But I will say this. The difference between the year 2 Norvell team and the year 2 Napier team is the year 2 Norvell team fought, got better. It felt like, did not look undisciplined as you got toward the end of the season. And that feels like the difference. But again, and this is what I would say if I were Billy Napier, if I'm defending my job. Yes, they lost, but on the road against Missouri, which is a top 10 team, they fought and were in a position to win the game against an undefeated team in a rivalry game. They were in a position to win the game. So if I'm Billy Napier, I'm going, okay, you say Mike Norvell had a young team be better and at the end of year 2. If my schedule's flipped and I'm playing, not good teams right there, we're winning those games. So I get where he can defend that. Like I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on this. I know there's a lot of Florida fans that want to see a change. I really don't have an opinion. Because I think you can make that argument. Like I just made the financial argument. And if you make the financial argument, you probably make the move. But if you make you got to give somebody time eventually argument, I think there's merit to that.
There is. But I will say, to counter your counter, you know what Florida fans are saying, and they may not be saying this exactly, but I'll use a metaphor. It's easy to let Mike Norvell be the guy that gets to bake that cake when he doesn't live or exist or work in a kitchen with a dozen or another dozen grade A pastry chefs.
Right.
And now
Kirby Smart is the difference.
Right. Now that Oklahoma and Texas are coming into the league, and you play Kirby every year, you're going to face off against Saban every other year. Texas is on the schedule next year. You're playing LSU. The further allowing the cake to bake makes sense in a vacuum, but it can burn, and it can burn badly, and suddenly you're staring at looking up from the bottom of the SEC when you're a proud program like Florida that has 2 championships in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it is going to be a very interesting time in Gainesville because, again, if they don't make a move, you're still going to see a lot of staff moves. And that's like coordinator domino stuff is going to happen too. We'll see more head coaches get officially hired on Sunday. We'll probably see some more get fired on Sunday too. And then those jobs will fill. The dominoes will then go. We said if Stoops were to leave Kentucky, we think it's John Summerall from Troy would be the choice, but we don't know. And this is going to be a wild next week or so, Jesse, because you've got potentially classic Pac-12 championship game, potentially classic SEC championship game, very interesting Big 12 championship game, very interesting ACC championship game. The Big 10 championship game, we're pretty sure we know it's going to happen. But think about this, Jesse. The only thing standing between Tony Petitti, the Big 10 commissioner, handing Jim Harbaugh, the man he suspended 3 weeks ago, the conference championship trophy, all that stands between Petitti and having to hand the trophy to Harbaugh are Kirk and Brian Ferentz.
And Mr. Deacon Hill.
Deacon Hill. The absolute unit of a quarterback. I cannot believe that.
Can Iowa's Black Jared Lorenzen, throw for over 100 yards against Michigan? What you got?
I don't think so, but I'm very excited to watch that game just because of the drama stuff.
Oh, it's going to be incredible.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we did see that result 2 years ago, and it was 41-0. But let us hold hope that we'll see a much more entertaining game in Indianapolis next weekend.
Listen, we're going to see a lot of entertaining games, Jesse. We're going to see some very interesting coaching moves. There are going to be a lot of fan bases. Like, again, you want your message board geniuses night. Go look at what they're posting from Texags right now. Like they're on fire right now.
I guess right before we wrap up, what if in this hypothetical, Stoops goes to A&M and Kentucky gets Summerall?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think? Yeah, you think Wildcats fans are actually a little bit like, hey, we were ready for a reset?
Well, interestingly enough, our friend Clark Brooks, the SEC stat cat, who is a very attuned to the
dogged
Kentucky
fan.
Yeah, he said, "Sure, let's without thought replace the longtime successful coach with a guy from the Sun Belt. That's worked out so well for Florida." That's exactly what he tweeted about an hour ago.
So maybe not then.
Yeah, it's
maybe
gonna
not
be it's going to be interesting because with a lot of these jobs, I don't know that there's a candidate that's going to make everybody happy. But I will point out, because we've been very wrong on some of these guys before, Jesse. Like, we all thought Scott Frost was going to work at Nebraska. We all thought he'd be great. Sometimes it just doesn't work. And I remember Jed Fish being fairly universally panned when he was hired at Arizona. He's been awesome. So you just don't know.
You don't. And as I peek at Twitter as we wrap up here, we are, as someone who was on the ground and wrote some columns that did well and got a lot of buzz during the Schiano nights at Tennessee, or Schiano Day, the sacking Sunday. We're not there yet on Twitter, but there is some just insane outrage right now from Aggie land over these rumored reports. Something I literally haven't seen since Schiano.
I was in Auburn on Schiano Sunday. Remember? So this was after the 2017 Iron Bowl. Auburn wins to set up an Auburn-Georgia rematch in the SEC title game. And I remember, sitting there because Gus Malzahn had a press conference on Sunday night. And so I went to the Gus Malzahn press conference, chit-chatted with the Auburn beat writers and all that. And we're all just like, are you looking at this Tennessee stuff? Like, and you realized at a certain point, like, oh my God, it's really turning. Like they've made a deal and they're going to have to go back on it. And that's the only time I've ever seen something like that. I have seen times where a name got floated and the backlash was so bad that a school moved on. So,
and remember, Tennessee fans know this. It could get worse, because it did get worse.
It did. And I actually thought, this shows how stupid I am with this stuff. I thought Jeremy Pruitt was going to be a good hire at Tennessee.
I think I got to know Jeremy a little bit. I think he's a hell of a good football coach. I think he was an awful people manager and had no idea how to run a program, and that played itself out spectacularly.
I should have listened to Aaron Murray, who was adamant.
He called it right away,
adamant.
And Murray got dumped on immediately for that.
Well,
by a bunch of Alabama fans.
Let me throw another Aaron Murray thing at you. Aaron is a good dude. I worked with him a lot at SiriusXM. Obviously, you see him calling games on ESPN. He's also got a podcast with our friend T-Bob Hebert called Snaps. Aaron also said this to me several years ago on a radio show we were doing together. He went on about a 15-minute rant about the way Jimbo Fisher makes his quarterbacks hold the ball. Like they have to keep it cocked.
The Haynes King
by their ear. Yeah. And he's like, it makes them so robotic. They can't play free. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody's done that in 10 years. Like, he's just going off. After that, I could never unsee it. I was totally out on Jimbo Fisher after that because I could not unsee it. And I was
like,
laughing.
Oh, there's Kellen Mond like that. Oh, there's Zach Calzada playing like that. Oh, there's Haynes King doing that.
Yep. I was laughing because our friends Bruce Feldman and Sam Kahn and Max Olson did a story in The Athletic about what went wrong at Texas A&M. And in that was that entire recruiting staff were saying, Jimbo made his quarterbacks hold the ball by their ear and they couldn't play free. And it was just great. Like, it's but yes. So if Aaron Murray says something immediately after a coach gets hired, I think we need to treat him as an oracle. Like, because he seems to have it. He seems to nail it every time.
Oh, man. Night in College Station. It's going to be a long one. It's going to be a long one for Texags, man.
Well, guess what? We do this show 6 nights a week during the season. We got another show on Sunday night. We will definitely be talking about all the news that will be breaking on Sunday, because I guarantee you there's going to be a bunch of it. We will talk to you then.